The 20th century saw a resurgence of Greek philosophy put into practice. The sexual revolution is a repeat of Epicureanism, the belief that the body is of no value, so we can do anything we like with it, including overeating, casual sex, drug use, or sedentary life choices. In the early 80s, late 80s, early 90s, the evangelical church responded by repeating Stoicism, the belief that the body is of no value, so we should spend our lives in ascetic discipline, hoping to die quickly and transcend the body. The first encouraged sexual hedonism. The second discouraged any form of sexual interest. Curiously, however, both movements exist by separating sex from marriage. The former is idolized, and the latter is essentially abandoned. Without the charisms of male and female, without the icons of marriage, and with marriage no longer a prerequisite for sex, why bother with marriage at all? And perhaps worst of all, purity culture utterly failed to encourage godly chastity. Roughly 90% of participants failed to honor their vows of celibacy, and many were traumatized in the process. Sex was idolized, and the sexual revolution now has near total control over American culture, with roughly 98% of Americans having sex before marriage, including at least 80% of professing Christians. In this essay, I'll be talking about the culture shifts that were the result of the technological contributions of the sexual revolution, as well as the harm caused by purity culture. There are three major technological revolutions worth mentioning that led to the sexual revolution. The Industrial Revolution overall, abortion, and hormonal birth control. The Industrial Revolution caused rapid shifts in how we understand the interaction between men and women, and opened the possibility for Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique. As a consequence, women became more invested in enjoying their youth and seeking adventure than in building a family. This was suggested as a phenomenon as early as 1869. In this first section, I will be discussing primarily abortion and birth control, though. The debate around abortion dates back to the 1800s. Although this is typically portrayed as a natural feminist issue, it is more likely that popular acceptance of abortion is a natural phenomenon on its own, resulting from a number of social and technological concerns. Feminism has historically been interested in granting women greater autonomy to decide when not to bear children. But until the 1960s, feminism had little to nothing to say about how this should be accomplished. So I think social acceptance of abortion is primarily the result of the Industrial Revolution and growing concerns about fringe issues, including mostly concern for the life of the mother, the possibility of child deformity, and this came about due to the thalidomide controversy of the late 50s, and concerns for victims of rape and incest. It did not become a hot-button topic for feminism until 1969, when Betty Friedan and others formed NARAL, the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws, now Reproductive Freedom for All. And then, when they did this, the reason that they gave was to free women from the feminine mystique, a phenomenon of malaise experienced by housewives of the 1950s who wanted to work. At least, so argued Betty Friedan. Abortion was seen as a necessary tool to allow women the freedom to pursue romantic relationships, careers, and sexual self-expression without concern of reprisal. This was further popularized by media outlets such as Cosmo magazine, which pushed an agenda that encouraged women to be sexually promiscuous and to seek abortion as a means of enabling such a lifestyle. I find it difficult to believe that abortion is an issue that was pushed first by feminism. I think that it is more likely that feminists simply appropriated the issue when it became socially popular and finally fit their overarching agenda. Abortion, as a technological revolution, should be understood as part of the natural growth of medical healthcare technology. Recorded methods of abortion practice date back at least to the time of the Roman Empire. And to say that they are grisly is putting it mildly, to say the least. Thus, while shifting attitudes toward abortion in society are clearly visible, I doubt very much that these issues would have resulted in a total shift of the discussion were it not for the development of better surgical procedures for completing abortions. We should also recognize here that the two primary groups who opposed abortion during the 1900s were Roman Catholics and doctors. This was due in large part to concerns for women's safety, not just the safety of the unborn. However, technological developments invalidated these concerns. Along with the technology to perform a safe abortion, the shifting social attitude resulting from the Industrial Revolution, Enlightenment, and philosophical ideas of freedom and equality, as well as legitimate social concerns for preserving the lives of women, children with deformities, and circumstances of rape and incest, it's understandable that we came to view sex as, well, just a hobby. However, the single greatest technological contribution to the sexual revolution is undeniably the pill. Released in 1960, this product, promoted by Margaret Sanger, revolutionized the world of marriage. Until this point, there was no biological possibility for women to consider sex without considering its possible consequences, namely conception and pregnancy. The result of this development was a division of the world of courtship into two camps, those pursuing sex and those pursuing marriage. Because women are less likely to pursue cheap sex even after the sexual revolution, women have effective control over this arena, that is, cheap sex. We're talking supply and demand here. In contrast, the ones who have effective control of the pursuit of marriage are men, due to their scarcity and the traditional role of actually proposing marriage. Now, there are a number of concerns surrounding hormonal birth control, and probably the biggest starts with the fact that at least 80% of all women have been prescribed the pill at some point in their lives. Therefore, the side effects of hormonal birth control are incredibly widespread. There are two questions to explore that are related to possible side effects of hormonal birth control. First, has it contributed to changes in testosterone levels and sperm quality in men? And more importantly, does it affect women's predilections towards mate selection, or does it affect how women engage with the sexual dance? First, on the subject of testosterone levels and sperm quality. This is significant because testosterone levels indicate men's general amorousness, or their desire to pursue romantic interactions. Lower testosterone levels in men mean less interaction with women in the pursuit of marriage. And obviously, lower sperm quality, including how many, how active, and how intact they are, means lower fertility. Now, we are well aware at this point that both of these, dropping T levels and lower sperm quality, have become common in the Western world. Although suggested reasons for this often point to our general lack of health and the spread of obesity, and I think these probably are the biggest causal factors, others have suggested that endocrine disrupting chemicals are part of the cause. The pill is a massive endocrine disruptor. It has also been suggested during the past decade that one reason that endocrine disrupting chemicals have become so common is their presence in drinking water, and that EDCs are present in drinking water due to women's overuse of the pill. However, the research claims supporting this idea of the pill in the drinking water are, they're dubious. And my guess is that it's a conspiracy theory, but unfortunately that means it might be true and it might not. Now we have to notice, for example, that the groups that are most adamant that there isn't enough of the pill in drinking water to have an effect are all groups like Big Pharma or feminist advocates who have a lot to lose with the pill coming under scrutiny. Now, I think the most likely explanation for EDCs, the endocrine disrupting chemicals in our drinking water, is that they are the result of many technological shifts, particularly the presence of EDCs in plastics. In either case, the effect on men's pursuit of romantic interactions is essentially unavoidable, though, unless EDCs stop being used. And given how common and convenient they are, as well as the near impossibility of replacing them, I'm not exactly optimistic about this happening anytime soon. And keep in mind, we're still talking about something that might or might not be a consequence of the sexual revolution. But more important than hormonal birth control's effect on men is, of course, its effect on women, because it will always affect the women who are prescribed this. Now, taking the pill can lead to significant changes in a woman's sexual desire, including a negative impact on her quality of life, her self-esteem, and interpersonal relationships. And ironically, the pill can also lead to decreased sexual desire. So you take the pill partly in order to be free to have sex whenever you want, and all of a sudden you don't want it anymore. But the greatest risk is probably a more nefarious one. Women's methods of mate selection rely heavily on intuitive hormonal indicators to evaluate the men who approach them. In particular, women are influenced by the smell of prospective mates. Men's smells are linked to their MHCs, that is, their major histocompatibility complex. And by subconsciously comparing her MHCs to that of her suitor, a woman is able to intuit how genetically compatible they are. This is mostly a metric of the man's immune system and whether or not his complements her own. In essence, women can smell whether a man is her cousin. Now, men with a similar MHC are perceived as less attractive than men with a different MHC. Hormonal birth control essentially convinces a woman's body that she is perpetually pregnant, so her reproductive system does not engage the menstrual cycle and she doesn't ovulate. When a woman is pregnant, her hormonal balance shifts dramatically. In particular, she shifts from a mate or sex-seeking mindset to a nesting mindset. She is not trying to have children, but to prepare to care for a child. In such a mindset as this, a woman's perception of MHCs flips. Consequently, a woman's attraction to men varies depending on whether or not she is taking the pill. If she is on the pill, she will be attracted to men with genetically similar MHCs, that is, more like her family. When she's not on the pill, she will be attracted to men with genetically different MHCs, that is, less like her family. This can be particularly damaging for women who meet their partner while on birth control, marry, decide to have children, and subsequently stop taking birth control. In many cases, the woman finds that her husband suddenly goes from being sexually desirable to being sexually repulsive. Because of this, scientists have recommended that when women marry, they continue whichever practice they are using, on or off the pill, permanently. Although this effect is solidly supported by research, it is unsurprising that this phenomenon has not been addressed in popular culture, given that, 80% of women have taken the pill. And as I already mentioned, it's a massive source of income for pharmaceutical industries, and it's a major cash cow for feminist activist organizations. And yet the pill definitely has adverse effects on women that could lead to lower desire for sexual intimacy. Now, whether or not it has a ripple effect on men that lowers their sexual virility and libido just adds insult to injury. In sum, the sexual revolution pushed for the acceptance of a wide range of sexual behavior that the Church deems immoral. However, the cultural component of the sexual revolution would not exist without technological developments that led to a malaise among women, that is, the Industrial Revolution, as well as medical advances that sanitized our view of abortion and hormonal birth control. All of these together led to a split in the dating market. Furthermore, birth control has a discernible effect on women's sexual desire, which has shifted women's involvement in the courtship dance and might even be influencing men's libido and virility. And even if birth control isn't having this effect on men, men's libido and virility are certainly affected in this way by other technologies, particularly in plastics. Consequently, our culture and biology have changed so that we no longer desire marriage and intimacy as we ought to. Furthermore, our fertility is dropping rapidly, and our disinterest in children is leading to later and later pregnancies, which further contributes to decreased fertility for the couples who do want to have children. And the limits of all of this phenomena have yet to be mapped. And unfortunately, this is only the technological consequence of neo-Epicureanism. We still have to address the neo-Stoicism that is veiled beneath purity culture. Purity culture is an umbrella term for Christian ministries and teachings that focus on encouraging people to remain abstinent until marriage. Although it began to develop in the late 80s, early 90s, the moment it was unveiled was a rally by the organization True Love Waits, which was held in D.C. on July 29th, 1994. During this event, more than 200,000 teens filled out pledge cards and staked them to the green of the Washington Mall. These cards pledged to God and to their future spouse that they would remain sexually pure until their marriage. A 2010 estimate suggested that perhaps as many as 1/6 of American teens made a pledge like this. Although this movement was clearly intended as a counter to the sexual excesses of the culture, it has ultimately proved to be destructive in a number of areas. Probably the most important issue within the movement is the meaning of purity. On the one hand, a modern physical virginity definition is clear and simple. Don't have sex with anyone outside of your marriage, and you're good. However, this may have led to a pattern of teenagers who will do anything except vaginal intercourse. Although this appears to be uncommon, at least among religious teens, it is probably more commonly associated with teens who apostatized or would eventually. Purity culture also upped the ante by asking the question, so what are you saving for your marriage? And it's not a bad question, but it led to the opposite problem. Teens began to feel they ought to avoid all forms of intimacy. Kissing, hand-holding, eye contact, or even long conversations came to be viewed as risk behaviors. While 90% of participants in purity culture eventually broke their vows, many others were sexually stunted. This came about because they thought that they needed to defend one another from temptation to sex. And, as long as I'm caring for my brother or my sister's temptation, then I'm caring for myself. However, recent criticism has revealed that these behaviors led to an inability in adulthood to form romantic attachments of any kind and a significant degree of personal shame. Not to mention the idea of taking responsibility for your brother is antithetical to Scripture, particularly a passage in Proverbs that I will mention later. Both sexes were affected by purity culture differently. It is fairly well documented in articles and books that women felt sexually objectified and manipulated by purity culture. The message was heavily tailored to teach women to be obedient and submissive to the point of abdicating their personal autonomy. And that is an extreme and destructive misrepresentation of Ephesians 5, if you'll recall my second essay. Women were also taught that they were personally responsible for men's lustful behavior. Modest attire was a woman's responsibility in order to avoid causing men to sin. Women, purity culture would have it, are seductresses at all times. On the other hand, purity culture has typically been portrayed as a school that teaches men to dominate women. If women were taught to be submissive, the men must have been taught to be dominating. Now, while this is true in some instances, it is not the whole of what men were taught. Matthew 5:27 through 28 reads, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart." In this spirit, purity culture taught men that they are all rapists. To be an adolescent boy is to experience a degree of lust that is beyond your control. Your testosterone levels are at their highest, and you have not yet learned to handle this new sexual desire. At that age, a stiff breeze can give you an erection, let alone a mildly attractive girl. So when you desire pretty much every girl that you see, you are constantly committing adultery. But since neither you nor these women are married, you naturally start to equate adultery with the only remaining sexual sin that applies in this case, that is, rape. This was doubly reinforced for boys who lived both in purity culture and in feminist spaces. As a consequence, men were placed in a catch-22. If you interact with a woman you find attractive, you have raped her. But your only other alternative is to never interact with women at all. Neither this experience nor women's experience were ever expressed clearly or explicitly within purity culture. The point is that the climate and the ideals created this impression. No prompting was required. Lastly, purity culture not only failed to define the limits of purity, it failed to understand the essence of purity. A fascinating element of Gregory of Nyssa's writings on virginity is that he makes it very clear that purity is not abstinence. And if we are to learn from the life of Saint Mary of Egypt, we have to recognize that physical virginity is of limited value to God. Purity itself is a matter of the heart. It's a matter of our entire life before God. Ironically, in this way, the Orthodox belief is that married couples participate in a sort of virginity, or at least a sort of purity. Because their sexual sharing is in the proper context, they are not treated as if they have abandoned their purity. In fact, for them to cease having intercourse might be a sort of failure of purity. Because chastity is about our whole attitude toward life, the value of singleness lies in a lack of distraction. 1 Corinthians 7, 1 through 9, and I'll paraphrase C.S. Lewis on this. Paul's concern is not the sin that takes place in the marriage bed, but marriage itself. For marriage is a potential distraction from our love of God. Ironically, this is the value of singleness. Without the distraction of a spouse, we are free to devote ourselves wholly to God, though I should clarify that this does not remove from us the responsibilities of community and mutual love. So, for men and women who have failed to maintain their physical virginity until marriage, particularly those who have had it stripped from them by force, purity culture ought to have been much more forgiving than it actually was. What matters is not the nature of our sin so much as the nature of our repentance and our continuing pursuit of purity. And this does not change whether we are celibate or sexually active, single or married. Purity culture taught the lie that chastity, that virginity in particular, is more important than all of the responsibility of righteousness together, and that sex is to be idolized as the reason and purpose for marriage. Now let's reflect back on all of this. The common thread throughout these two movements, the sexual revolution and purity culture, is the idolization of sex over marriage. Christians have not only failed to shift this, but contributed to the problem. This is one of the primary concerns I've raised over the last few essays. However, while we might expect to see a significant rise in sexual activity as a result, the opposite is actually true. Celibacy rates are rising. Men in particular are having less sex. For men aged 18 through 24, rates of celibacy have increased from 18% to 30%. For women in the same age bracket, rates of celibacy have increased from 16% to 20%. Although we have idolized sex and created a society that largely revolves around it, something appears to be missing from the equation. More shocking is a pair of illogical behaviors men and women are displaying. Although we have historically understood men as having an unquenchable desire for sex, men are choosing voluntarily to opt out of society, either leaving for greener pastures like the passport bros, or simply disappearing entirely like MGTOW or the incels. Men's desire for sex, it appears, is not without limits, and we have the dubious honor of being the generation that discovered those limits. Women are choosing to pursue meaningless sex. Now, this in and of itself might not be that surprising, but what is surprising is that these women do not appear to be learning from the consequences of this behavior. In a recent study, social scientists discovered that women feel deeply dissatisfied with one-night stands and even shameful. However, instead of learning from these experiences and making different choices, women are doubling down on this behavior. A woman who is engaged in one-night stands is actually more likely to continue than to reevaluate. We are literally defying our biological programming. I cannot say for certain on this, I'm just guessing here, but I suspect that the combination of chemical influences in American society, birth control in the water, even if it's minimal, endocrine disrupting chemicals in plastics, the food industry, the prevalence of SSRIs, and changes in our overall health, particularly in obesity and activity levels, all of these together have shifted our hormones, I suspect, a tiny little bit. Not much, but just enough so that we no longer desire one another as much as we ought to. We no longer desire relationship enough to pursue it. As our culture puts sex on a pedestal and encourages us to look for the perfect mate, pursuing these goals is increasingly leaving a stale taste in our mouths. But what about some of these cultural influences? And this leads me to the end of my essay and to the next topic, which is a very popular but poorly understood topic, and that is social media and online dating. Are these phenomena changing the way we interact with one another? Well, that's a topic that I'll have to leave for next time, I'm afraid.